Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my start-sit decisions for every game in Week 14. Apologies for this video being a little bit late. I was more busy on Tuesday than I expected, so this video is coming in a little bit later than usual. So no time to waste. Let's begin. We are starting, as always, on Thursday night, where we have a great game this Thursday. If you look at this Lions-Cowboys matchup, there is going to be very, very little defense from both sides. The Cowboys defense is pretty atrocious. They rank first in terms of points allowed for quarterbacks and receivers, and then they're pretty neutral for running backs and tight ends. But where you might see a misleading stat is against the running back position. In the last month, holy shit, the Cowboys defense is actually waking up, and they actually rank as the worst matchup you can find. They literally have allowed the fewest fantasy points to the running back position in the last month. So this will be a true test against Jahmyr Gibbs. I don't believe that'll continue. I'm going to trust the season-long stats rather than the last 4 games. I know they've looked good, but perhaps matchups have played a role. So Gibbs, I consider matchup proof. I'm still locking Gibbs into the lineup. But Jameson Williams, I consider an absolute smash this week, a clear top 10 receiver, because the matchup is the best this year, and because I don't know what the status of Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to be. I will update you tomorrow with a live stream for this game. However, I'm expecting Amon-Ra not to be available. He missed both practices. He exited pretty early last week, and I do not think his ankle will be recovered in time. So there is a chance. I did see some reports that they haven't ruled him out yet. They could consider him a game time decision. I don't see it. I do not believe he'll be available. So without Amon-Ra on the field, we saw Jameson Williams with double-digit targets last week. For the first time in a while, a player who was traditionally very boom bust, very risky, I think now is one of the safest plays you can find. They have to throw the ball. There's no Laporta either, and JMO, I think, is a lock in the lineup. But Jared Goff, I think, has legit starting value this week. This matchup against Dallas just lets so many points go through their hands. It's so easy to score on the Cowboys. So I trust Goff to throw at least 1, if not 2 touchdowns this week. I could easily see a shootout. And if you get Gibbs to contribute in the passing game this week, then I think you'll have an elite game out of Jared Goff. Always a little bit risky to trust him. Sometimes his ceiling is capped. He doesn't run the ball at all. But I do like this matchup a lot, and I would trust it. I would upgrade and start Jared Goff this week. But on the flip side, Dak Prescott gets the second best matchup you can find. Detroit's defense is terrible, except against the run. They're really good at stopping the run, and technically on the year, they're also good at stopping tight ends, but atrociously bad at stopping quarterbacks. We saw Jameis Winston have the game of his life. Jordan Love just threw 4 touchdown passes, and I would expect Dak to do something similar. This game is indoors. I trust Dak Prescott with my life. I would expect Dak to have more fantasy points than Goff this week. And because of his 2 top receivers getting a top 4 matchup, you're not benching either of them. That's going to be the path for success here. CeeDee Lamb, a lock in the lineup. And George Pickens has also earned your trust. At worst, a top 12 receiver at this point. So both got to be started. But I think because of how this offense operates in Dallas, I think I'm still starting Javonte Williams. I'm a bit reluctant to trust this matchup, the worst on the year. In the last month, it's down to number 25, so a little easier, but still not the spot that you want against Detroit. So I think I have to start Javonte. There aren't that many names getting his level of volume, and I think this game is more likely a shootout. I could still see a touchdown kind of easily for Javonte. So I'm still going to start him. I'm also still going to start Jake Ferguson. The matchup's not good, but I've seen Ferguson kind of be matchup proof at times and still offer a pretty safe floor. So given Dak, I think, just dominates this week, and because Javonte might be limited, that offense is so narrow and so obvious where the ball's going to go, I still think Ferguson will contribute well enough to be a good start. But I do think Isaac Tesla might be the league winner off the wire that you need to be picking up. I grabbed him in both of my leagues. I did not care about the price I had to pay. I bid a little extra, and shockingly, not too many people bid on Tesla behind me. So I think people are sleeping on him. I know his volume has been low this year, very few targets, and I do know Tom Kennedy did factor in a bit. But knowing that Amon-Ra didn't practice, I expect the third-round pick Isaac TeSlaa to be way more involved in the game plan, and he ran over 90% of routes last week. I trust TeSlaa to be on the field. So this matchup is fire. I'm trusting Goff this week. I know the ball's going to Jameson Williams, but I'm expecting it to also go to Isaac TeSlaa. And despite his limited target share this season, he does have a touchdown in 50% of his receptions. Only 6 catches on the year, but 3 touchdowns among those 6 catches. I trust TeSlaa in the red zone. I think elite upside for TeSlaa this week if Amon-Ra sits out. If they start targeting him with like 8+ looks, he's going to be elite, in my opinion. One of the highest value flex plays down the stretch if St. Brown misses time. But that's all dependent on Amon-Ra missing time. As long as that does happen, then I like Isaac TeSlaa. But with Laporta also out, there's very few players that actually catch the ball in Detroit. So TeSlaa, I think, is awesome this week. I would start him as long as Amon-Ra is ruled out. And then Dave Montgomery doesn't get a good matchup. I mentioned in the last month, the Cowboys are down to dead last in terms of points allowed. They're actually a tougher matchup in the last 4 games than Detroit is for running backs. So I could see Montgomery not pay off here, but I do think the only way the Lions win this game is if they run it down the Cowboys' throat and dominate time of possession, and I still expect volume for Montgomery. So still in the flex conversation, running back gets a bit thin beyond the top 25, but I doubt he's going to be an automatic start given this matchup. Looks difficult right now. So given it's difficult, maybe you'd consider Dallas in your lineup, but I would bench him for sure. I'm also benching Flournoy and Tolbert, and because I think this matchup is a shootout, why I'm benching Dallas, I am 100% also benching Detroit. Both of these offenses are elite. Neither defense, I think, can really stop them. While they have shown flashes, they're good at stopping the run and not much else. I think the passing game will be on fire this week. So no thanks with either defense. I'm also benching Brock Wright. I'm not even sure if he's coming back to the lineup healthy yet. I also expect Khalif Raymond to miss. And then Laporta, I mentioned, is out on IR. And Amon-Ra, I do not believe, will be healthy enough to play. So got to bench all those Lions. And then there are some dark horse candidates for the Cowboys. I think Malik Davis could potentially score another touchdown last week, but given this matchup against Detroit is so tough, I think I would ignore that and just pass. And then Kevontae Turpin, I think, is really the only name that might pique my interest in DFS. I could see a big touchdown given Turpin's speed against the bad Lions secondary. So good luck with that. I think I'm benching everyone beyond Isaac TeSlaa, though. I think Montgomery and TeSlaa are the only names I'm like considering. That's it for this matchup. Let's move on to the next one. We're in Atlanta. I have a hard time exactly knowing how this game is going to go because I want to say it's just a clear Seahawks blowout. And that is the more likely scenario. But sometimes the Falcons do wake up sometimes, and then sometimes the Seahawks just don't show up. Like last week, their offense was terrible. So maybe it was just Brian Flores exposing Sam Darnold. That Vikings defense probably knew some of his weaknesses. So there's a chance the Falcons look at that game script and watch the film and take some key pieces away from that and limit Darnold again. But in general, the Seahawks defense is really the only one that scares you in this matchup. A bottom 12 matchup for quarterbacks, bottom 4 for running back, and then bottom 10 for receiver. But on the year, it does rank top 7 for tight ends. If we look a little closer, the Seahawks are actually allowing top 4 numbers for the tight end position. So I do think Kyle Pitts gets a big upgrade in terms of this matchup. But when we look at the Falcons defense, it is kind of all over the board. A relatively positive matchup, though, for quarterbacks in the last month. It ranks top 10. They've been getting pretty bad on defense lately. And then against running backs, it's top 10 as well, number 9. And then against receivers, it's neutral, number 13 this year. But in the last month, their defense is giving up top 6 points in fantasy to receivers. So a real big upgrade, top 10 for quarterbacks, running backs, and receivers against Atlanta. However, against tight end, while it's bottom 2 on the year, they have also been vulnerable lately, down to just number 14 instead of the second toughest. So across the board, there's no real downgrade, and that's why I think ultimately the Seahawks, as long as they don't shit the bed, I would trust on offense. And especially JSN, he's a lock in the lineup. This matchup shouldn't scare you at all. So JSN should bounce back with a monster game. I know last week was bad, but ultimately they won on defense. They didn't have to do much on offense last week. So this will change. I'm expecting JSN to pop off again. And then Bijan Robinson was lights out last week. Still got vultured by Algier, but it did not matter. In the Blunt League, he gave me 30 points with some bonus points. So I'm trusting him for sure against Seattle. While the running back matchup's tough, I always expect a lot of catches to save you. So maybe you get burned for a touchdown, but you cannot bench Bijan Robinson. And same goes for Drake London. If London is active, there is no chance in hell I am benching Drake London. The targets will be double digits, and he's been matchup proof. Even in bad spots this year, he's shown up. So I think he'll be back on the field. He's been upgraded to day. And although he did miss practice on Wednesday, that's just a walkthrough. Let's monitor it on Friday. That's really the day that matters most. So I think he'll be back. It's not a guarantee, but if he does play, I would be absolutely starting Drake London. But I'm also going to start the Seahawks defense. The Kirk Cousins offense is not impressive enough, and especially if London does not play, then I would be terrified of trusting a Falcon beyond Bijan Robinson. So Seattle, been a great defense this year, definitely one of the more talented units. Got to start him on the road at the Falcons, definitely top 10 in the rankings. But Charbonnet still scoring touchdowns at a high rate. I wish he got more looks, but this matchup against Atlanta is top 10. So I think he's a good flex play as always. Probably not going to crack my top 20. If he does, he's not going to be top 16. More of a higher end flex play. Those touchdowns aren't always destined to hit. If you don't get a touchdown, you will get burned on Charbonnet. So just a flex play, but Walker also a high-end flex play. Walker is a safer option. The floor is actually higher with Walker, but the reason the ceiling is usually higher on Charbonnet is because of the touchdown production. And other than the game that Charbonnet missed, and then the Rams game, Walker is just not getting into the end zone. So even if he gives you 12 points on just yards and catches, I could still see Charbs outscore him. That's how I ranked them last week, and that's how it did pay off. In the end, Charbonnet was more valuable for fantasy. So that's how I'm going to keep ranking them, Charbonnet over Walker. But I could see Walker have a really effective game. He's due for like a massive 100-yard performance on the ground. It could happen this week if the Falcons really do give up. But I love the matchup here for Kyle Pitts. He played really well last week in a good matchup. So why not consider it? At the very least, the Seahawks are a plus spot on the year. We've been endorsing tight ends against Seattle, and time again, they do pay off. Even TJ Hawkinson was actually pretty okay against Seattle last week, despite the Vikings offense looking like garbage. So Kyle Pitts could have a second straight good game. I will rank him closer to the top 10, but I still have a hard time trusting him entirely. And then Tyler Algier, pretty touchdown dependent, but still getting enough looks. Like Algier and Charbonnet are not that far off of each other, but in this matchup, it's definitely much tougher. So just a lower end flex play, still not a safe option. I would much rather go Charbs or Walker in this game. But last week was just so dog shit for Sam Darnold. Maybe you just can't trust him. I really apologize for the ranking on Darnold last week. I thought he would overcome. I did not trust the Vikings defense, and boy, was I wrong. So maybe the defense for Seattle just helped him so much. He didn't contribute, but he just didn't have any touchdowns and not many yards. They didn't throw the ball very much last week. So Darnold shit the bed, but I expect JSN and him to bounce back. But at this point, I don't think you can start him with much confidence. So going to ignore the upgrade matchup. But the Falcons are giving up top 10 numbers lately. There's a chance I am underestimating Sam Darnold. But his tight end, AJ Barner, I think could play decent. The matchup's neutral now, so not terrible, but feels like more of a long shot. I'd rather go Pitts in this game, and if I can say that, then I'd rather just bench the other tight end. So not going to trust him, but Kirk Cousins, also a little interesting lately. Getting some touchdowns, but it's going to be dependent on London coming back to the lineup. Until London plays, I would never trust Kirk Cousins in the lineup. But the matchup against Atlanta in the secondary is not bad. So I could see another receiver pay off, but it's just not really working out for Kupp lately. So not going to trust him. And then Shaheed just really doesn't have good chemistry with Darnold. Nothing special with Shaheed lately. I think he's absolutely droppable at this point, if you haven't done so already. Shaheed is unstartable, but Arroyo are also unstartable with AJ Barner there. I would not trust the rookie tight end. But Atlanta's defense is too up and down. They just lost to the Jets. Are you going to trust them against the Seahawks? I would not. Fuck that shit. Falcons a must bench. But Mooney would be more interesting if London did not play, but in this matchup, I don't think he'd be a good option either. Just a mediocre flex play at best. And odds are I would just bench him. Odds are I would ignore Darnell Mooney in this Seahawks matchup. But Davis Sills did score a touchdown last week, so maybe an underrated connection with Cousins, given their practice squad chemistry. Maybe it'll continue, but I would doubt it. No value at all, in my opinion, on Davis Sills. But Penix still on IR, and then Torrey Horton, I believe, also is on IR for a few more weeks. So that's it for the start-sit decisions in this matchup. I'm definitely trusting JSN, Bijan, and the Seahawks defense. Ideally, I can bench guys like Pitts, Algier, and even Darnold, but they are kind of tempting given their roles, and some matchups this week are not that bad. But really, if I'm looking for a flex play, it's Charbonnet or Walker. Beyond that point, I'm likely benching most players in this matchup. But the next game to bring up is Cincinnati at Buffalo, and this is the first game where weather might be a factor. It is expected to be snowing in Buffalo this week, but it's still just Wednesday. The forecast could change, and maybe it's not going to be actively snowing during the game, but I would expect that to happen, so that does benefit the Bills offense a little bit. Josh Allen always gets a advantage in these snow games. The Bills know how to play in that weather, but I don't think the Bengals will be atrociously bad. Their defense, though, is terrible. So I think this game is much more likely a shootout than not. These two quarterbacks are too good to fade. But if we look at the Bengals defensive matchup real quick, against quarterbacks, it's top 3. Against running backs, it's number 1 on the year. However, in the last month, it's down to number 16. They are stepping up a little bit more on defense. So James Cook doesn't get as good of an upgrade as you might think, but still not going to bench him. And then against receiver, they're actually not bad at all. They rank bottom 6 on the season, number 27, but it's mainly because their secondary cannot tackle the tight end position. There are so many touchdowns and yards going to tight end instead of receiver against Cincinnati. That is where they're a bad matchup for receiver. But in terms of the Bills, I typically don't want to be starting quarterbacks against Buffalo. Shockingly, their secondary is actually pretty good, and especially given they stop tight ends better than anyone, I don't think I trust a tight end for the Bengals this week. That's for sure going to blow up in your face. But for receivers, it's number 21, so slight downgrade. I still think Jamar and T. Higgins are going to be matchup proof. Where it's a good spot, though, is against the run. The Bills' run defense is atrociously bad, number 3 on the year. And in the last month, it's actually a better matchup than the Bengals, straight up. So that is really where you can exploit Buffalo. But in general, I'm trusting the quarterbacks. I know this matchup is bad for Burrow, but I don't care. This game is likely a shootout, and Burrow has beaten Allen every time they've faced off against each other. So I think Burrow will step up despite the bad weather and bad matchup. But Allen going to be lights out. Great matchup. Definitely some rushing stats this week. With the snowfall, I think he'll be lights out. So got to start him. That's guaranteed going to pay off there. And then James Cook is not a player you're ever benching. So likely a top 6 running back in the ranks this week again. And against Cincy, definitely an upgrade on the season. But Jamar Chase is matchup proof, so don't care that the Bills secondary's a little tough. Not going to stop Jamar Chase. But Chase Brown, I think, is going to be lights out dominant this week. I think Chase Brown in this matchup is a clear must start. I will rank him top 10. I haven't done that on Chase Brown in quite some time. So love him this week. Absolutely guaranteed must start. But then T. Higgins, I'm assuming he comes back to the lineup off the concussion, and I would assume he's a good start. So I'm going to put T. Higgins in my lineup as long as he's healthy enough to play. But I'm a bit reluctant to fully trust Khalil Shakir. Bengals defense is actually good against wide receivers, so this could blow up in your face entirely. Last week it did as well. Shakir was not a good play. I was wrong on that. But typically Shakir is the most reliable target in Buffalo, and especially if the injuries persist behind him on the depth chart, I think he's the only pass catcher in Buffalo I would trust. I do not feel that safe trusting and endorsing Dalton Kincaid. This matchup is fire, so I think I'd probably plug him into the lineup, but at the moment, I don't know if he's healthy, and for those reasons, I don't think I can endorse him on Wednesday yet. So let's make sure he's available first. He was limited in practice last week. He was limited on Wednesday as well, but last week he didn't play, so could easily happen again. He's been very up and down, but in this matchup, if Kincaid does start, then I would move him over. I would tell you to start Kincaid if he's active. This matchup is just too good, and I don't trust the other tight ends behind him. So my long shot for the Bills is rookie tight end Jack Hawes, and I would maybe expect a touchdown for another tight end other than Kincaid this week. So maybe it's going to be Hawes. He's been involved consistently, but last week Dawson Knox is a bit more involved. So odds are Knox will be the safer start, but this matchup is just so tempting. I think Hawes is a bit more exciting, invigorating to plug and play. You want to have some fun in fantasy sometimes, and Hawes I think is more entertaining of a start than Knox, but very unreliable, especially if Kincaid plays, no chance at all. And then this matchup is so good for running backs, I think Samaje Perine may pique your interest. Last week I think is kind of unrepeatable. I do not trust the volume incoming for Samaje Perine. After all, they were without T. Higgins, and other names needed to step up. So Chase Brown is not going anywhere. Samaje Perine gets a good matchup, could contribute, but until it happens consistently, I do not trust Samaje Perine in my lineup. So I'm going to pass, but have to acknowledge last week was kind of interesting. And then Dawson Knox, I told you, would be a bench, in my opinion. I don't trust him behind Kincaid or even above Jake Hawes. But Ty Johnson, I wouldn't trust this week, not getting enough volume to trust. And then Ray Davis did get more touches last week, but given the weather, maybe that played a factor. This weather might lean into Ray Davis again, but all in all, on the year, the volume is just not safe enough to trust. So I will pass on Ray Davis if I can. I think it's not worth your time. And then Keon Coleman actually scored a touchdown last week, but had been a healthy scratch. So let's wait and see on Keon. In general, the Bills passing game is so random. A touchdown does not make me confident it'll happen again in Buffalo. So I'm going to ignore Keon. I think he's unstartable. And then Andre Yoshivas would be more valuable if T. Higgins doesn't play, but given this matchup, if Higgins is coming back, then I would just bench Andre Yoshivas. I'm also going to bench Mike Gesicki. He was available last week, but Tanner Hudson, I believe, did score the touchdown instead, and that tight end room in Cincinnati is just a little too crowded for my liking. So I prefer Gesicki the most, but I would still bench him. And then I'm definitely benching the Bengals defense. They've been ass this year against Josh Allen, no fucking chance. And then against Joe Burrow, I'm also going to bench Buffalo. I think this game is a big shootout. I know it might be snowing, but I don't think it's going to stop either quarterback, and odds are this game with some playoff implications really turns into a barn burner. So maybe the weather really stops them, but I just don't see it. I don't think it's a big enough impact to slow anyone down. So I'm going to start the 4 top Bengals. Those guys are always in the lineup. Allen and Cook, always no-brain starts. And then if Kincaid is going to play, I would start him. I would upgrade him from where I'm showing you on this graphic here. I'd feel more confident if he's healthy. But at the moment, I don't know that for sure. So kind of a long shot to play in my opinion. That's it for this matchup. Those are my start sits in the Bills-Bengals game. But then in Cleveland, a very interesting matchup if you ask me. Shedeur Sanders is hosting Cam Ward. And the only 2 quarterbacks that were drafted last year with a shot at having a long career are in this matchup. So if Shedeur has any value down the stretch, it's going to be because he can win games like this against bad teams. You got to prove you can compete. So this is a good matchup for Shedeur Sanders against the Titans. It does rank as a top 10 spot on the season, but in the last month, it's actually up to number 6. So it's actually a great matchup for Shedeur Sanders. But I'm also expecting snow in this game, and last week the weather really shut down Shedeur. So for that reason, I am not going to press my luck on Shedeur, but the matchup is good. The matchup's also good for running backs, but if you look closer, not as much in the last month. It's actually down to number 28. In the last 4 games, the Titans are stepping up on defense against the run. It's actually very difficult to score points at running back in fantasy against Tennessee. So that actually might be a misleading matchup here. I might actually bench Judkins if I can, but odds are the volume will still carry him. I still think I'm going to start Quinshon Judkins, but against receiver, this is where you want to be going against them. But the weather, I think, kind of neutralizes this. I don't trust Shedeur as much, and I also don't trust his receivers at all. So I can't think of a safe Browns receiver to endorse this week. So this matchup kind of gets neutralized, pretty irrelevant in fantasy this week. But against tight end, it's a slight downgrade, so maybe Harold Fannin doesn't quite go off against Tennessee. But Cleveland against quarterbacks is not a good spot, but getting a little bit better. They did rank bottom 3 just a couple weeks ago. So trending in a better direction, but still a downgrade. I'm not going to trust Cam Ward if I don't have to. And then against running back, it was the toughest on the season just a few weeks ago, but in the last 4 games is actually allowing top 11 numbers. It's actually a big upgrade for running backs right now, a top 12 spot in the last month. So maybe you trust Tajay and Pollard a bit more because of that, but against receiver, you definitely don't trust a Titans wideout this week. None of them are even valuable in the first place. So can't trust him with no Ridley. I don't want anyone. And then against tight end for Cleveland, their defense is actually a bit easier. In the last month, they're allowing top 12 numbers for tight end. So we have seen Gunnar Helm overtake Okonkwo. That is a bit interesting when it comes to the Browns tight end room. But in terms of players I'm starting, I absolutely trust Cleveland's defense. The Titans offense is trash, and with the snow, I would trust them a bit more. So the Browns are a must start this week. Absolutely got to trust them. And then Quinshon Judkins, based on volume, I think is still in your lineup, but moving down a tier, I think he's a low-end RB2, not a safe automatic start. Not going to rank him top 12, given the Titans' run defense is actually bottom 5 in the last month. So good luck with Judkins. Going to need a touchdown. I think it still probably does hit, though. And then with Harold Fannin, he's the only reliable pass catcher in Cleveland. He has overtaken Njoku at this point, and I think he's the only guy that Shedeur trusts. So the matchup's not atrociously difficult. I think I'd still consider flexing Fannin, but don't feel confident with a touchdown. And then the Titans defense, maybe you feel like I'm ranking them a bit too low, but they're going to be a higher end flex option. I still don't think they're good enough to really contribute. But with the snow against Shedeur Sanders, they might be a reliable top 10 play. But given you want to be stashing defenses for the playoffs, odds are I'll ignore them. Tyjae Spears, however, gets a good upgrade this week, top 12 matchup in the last month, so I don't fear Cleveland anymore. And given the weather status, the snow in this game, I could see even extra looks in the run game. So I still think Spears is the more valuable of the two, but given he's just a pass catcher lately, I could see that actually not work out. But in PPR formats, I still am expecting at least 4 catches for Spears every week. But Pollard might go off in this game given an extra volume is probably incoming. If the Browns can't stop the run anymore, then maybe Pollard is a more valuable start. But still just a flex play. This Titans backfield is such an even split between the two. And I also still believe the Browns are a tougher matchup on the year. I may not actually buy in to the Browns being a good matchup. For the Titans, not a backfield that's matchup proof. So still reluctant to fully endorse him, but I could see one of these Titans running back actually outscore Quinshon Judkins. There's a chance they're actually very good, and maybe a touchdown will save you, but hard to trust where that's going to go. So my preference is still Tyjae Spears above Pollard, but they're both very close in the rankings. My long shots for this game are the quarterbacks, however, and if you look at this Browns matchup, it's so difficult with the snow, I'd probably pass. But at some point, Ward will wake up. I could still see Cam Ward have a good career despite a terrible rookie season. But they've been so bad on offense, I'm going to pass. And then given the snow, I think I'm also going to pass on Shedeur. I want a piece of this matchup. The Titans don't scare me, but the weather, I think, will limit him, and I don't trust his pass catchers enough. So you could get a deep house call potentially that might save you, but I doubt you'll get 2. And even if one of them hits, you probably don't go over like 12 points. So I'll pass. I don't think the upgrade in terms of matchups is worth it. And then everyone else I'm benching. And Njoku has returned to the lineup, but really been overtaken by Fannin, so not a safe start at all right now. Judy, not safe at all. I don't trust any receiver for the Browns, despite a good matchup. I'm going to pass in the snow. And then Dylan Sampson might get added looks given the snow, but not safe enough to trust. I only trust Judkins in Cleveland. But Gunnar Helm, I actually think is more valuable than Okonkwo, so I should have maybe put them in different order here. But Okonkwo did have more yards last week, despite more targets going to Gunnar Helm. So the matchup's not terrible lately, but I think I'm going to bench both of them. I don't trust the Titans tight end yet. And given the state of the position, it's deep enough where I don't think you can pick up and start and justify a Titans tight end in your lineup. I think I'm going to pass. But Gunnar Helm, I think, is the player I'm more interested in. But Chimeri DK in a terrible matchup, I'm going to bench. No thanks with any Titans receiver. And Ayamanor did return to the lineup last week, but pretty irrelevant. Same with Restrepo, but I think he's above Van Jefferson. Restrepo did get a little bit of volume in the last 2 games. So that's it for this matchup. I think other than the Browns defense and Judkins, everyone is such a gamble, I'm probably benching him, but Tajay and Pollard might have value this week, especially if it's snowing heavy. And then Fannin still somewhat relevant at tight end, despite the weather. But that's it for the starts. Very limited in this matchup. In Minnesota, the Vikings are hosting Washington, and this game is either going to have a ton of defense, because the only defense that actually scares me is going up against a team that's pretty suspect. The Commanders, I still don't actually believe in. I know last week they almost beat the Broncos, but it required overtime, and they still didn't put up that many points on offense, and then still they lost the game despite a valiant effort. So the Vikings defense, I think, is kind of tempting, not gonna lie, but against Jaden Daniels, that's where I think some of these stats might not work out for you. It's a bottom 10 matchup, but if you look a little closer, the Vikings have allowed the fewest fantasy points in the last month. But last week, Darnold only had like 3. So that's a big reason why that does skew the stats a bit. So I'm not going to downgrade Daniels as much as these stats might suggest, but a slightly concerning matchup. For running backs, it's neutral, but for wide receivers, it's terrible, bottom 2. So that's definitely not a good spot. But for tight ends, it is top 11. So maybe Zach Ertz could get an upgrade here, but when it comes to the Commanders defense, they're elite across the board, top 5 in every stat. For quarterbacks, top 5, running backs, number 4, wide receivers, top 3, and then tight ends is also number 5. They did play a little bit better at preventing touchdowns last week against Denver, but so many yards were given up, it's still a big upgrade, no matter how you slice it. So that's where I'm still going to trust Jaden Daniels if I have him. The Vikings defense is tough, but they're probably giving up a bit of a shootout, but I think the Commanders keep that game interesting, and I think Daniels still steps up. Maybe not as many rushing yards at this point, given the injury. He might not scramble as much, but still, I kind of trust him. His injury is to the non-throwing elbow. I think he'll be fine throwing the ball down the field. And Terry McLaurin had a brutal matchup last week, but still played very well. So that's where I think I'm going to disregard it. Terry could still hypothetically crack 1,000 yards on the year like he has consistently, but that would require a shit ton of production. I doubt it happens, but maybe he still plays well enough where this matchup is not scary enough to fade him. I still think Terry is a solid play, but Justin Jefferson, really hard to trust given his quarterback situation. So I want to upgrade him given the matchup. The Commanders are just so easy to torch. And at home, I do think Jefferson could play better, but it's going to come down to a touchdown. If he doesn't get a touchdown, he might burn you entirely. I do not trust his quarterback situation, but he has been getting the volume still. Under McCarthy, he'll probably still give you like 5 for 70, and maybe you get a touchdown given this matchup is so bad. But I could also see under 50 yards and Jefferson burn you again. But I think I still reluctantly have to start him given the matchup is top 3. But then Zach Ertz gets a top 11 matchup against Minnesota, and last week he was lights out. So if Daniels returns, his value increases in this offense. And given the matchup, I do think he's a interesting flex play, but not going to rank him top 10. I'm still not a full believer that Ertz is a lock in the lineup every week. But Debo played pretty poorly last week as Terry returned to the lineup. And given this matchup is so bad, I'd probably bench him if I could. But definitely a downgrade at the very least. Even Daniels, I don't think can make Debo matchup proof here. So not a safe start, more of a low end flex option. Last week was a bit concerning. He's also been injured for a while. Maybe that heel injury still lingering with Debo. So not a good matchup. I would probably just flex him, but ideally I'd bench him. And then Jordan Addison, despite the upgrade here, I would still likely bench. But the matchup is just so interesting. I think he's in the flex conversation still. So an upgrade, but McCarthy is so hard to trust. I'd probably bench Addison by proxy. And then Aaron Jones gets a great matchup, but I have a hard time trusting that Vikings offense. So he's the only one I would consider here. And then last week, it was great for RJ Harvey. So maybe you'll get a touchdown and it'll save you. But I could see it also blowing up in your face. I still don't really trust the Vikings offense enough. So I, based on the stats, should be ranking Aaron Jones as a clear start, but not my favorite play given the offense he's in. But McCarthy gets a big upgrade, a top 5 matchup, so maybe the rushing stats return to him and he does pad the numbers, but I would feel very embarrassed if I was actually starting JJ McCarthy. So maybe going to crack my top 20 just because the matchup is so good, but only in Superflex would I consider it. Odds are I'd be benching JJ McCarthy. But I also could see the defenses kind of step up. Like, it's not like you trust McCarthy. So that's where the Commanders are actually a little bit more tempting than typical, but their defense sucks. So odds are I'll bench him. But then the Vikings have a good defense against a good offense here. So something's got to give. I could see the Vikings absolutely blow up in your face and give up like 35 points on offense this week. So that I think is not where I'm interested. I still trust Daniels enough to start, but I could also see them play well enough where they're a good play. It's not like if Mariota gets the start, you know for sure that the Commanders offense will play well. So let's assume that Daniels starts, but if not, if it's Mariota, then I think Mariota would be a good long shot candidate here, probably a solid flex play. At quarterback, I might prefer him over McCarthy, to be honest. But otherwise, I'm benching everyone. I don't trust the touchdowns to be there every single week for Chris Rodriguez, and it's still a 3-man committee most of the time in Washington. So if you're going to roster and start a single Commanders running back, it should be Rodriguez. I think all of the hype on JCM has worn out, and I would not be starting Bill at all. So no thanks on Krosky Merritt. Let's hope for a touchdown on Rodriguez, but this week it's a little hard to like guarantee. The Vikings are below average on the year in terms of stats. So not the best spot, but it's still kind of tempting given his goal line work. And then Treylon Burks, I don't think is fully healthy. I think he may have exited last week if I'm not mistaken, but did play really well, is actually looking kind of good in the passing game. I believed in him when he was drafted, but it took so long. He still, I think, qualifies as a major bust. But TJ Hawkinson did pay off in a good matchup last week. He gets another against Washington, but I haven't seen anything from him to really trust him. When it comes to touchdowns, it's been bad. And McCarthy, I don't think can keep a third pass catcher viable. So I'd rather go to Addison. The matchup is better for receiver than tight end, but it's still good enough where maybe you'd consider it. I think I'm going to pass, though. I think I'll bench TJ Hawkinson. The tight end position is too deep to put him in the lineup, I think. But Jordan Mason, not a terrible matchup here, so maybe could pay off, but needs a touchdown. I think I would fade him. I wouldn't trust it. And then Jalen Naylor, not going to expect anything out of him. Very unlikely he has one of those big games once again. Odds are he burns you. So let's ignore him. I think that's the last player you'd even think about. And against Washington, while the matchup's good, I do not trust the quarterback. So very limited like must starts in this game because I want to be trusting the Commanders, but the matchup against Minnesota is typically a downgrade. And then despite the big upgrades for the Commanders defense, the Vikings offense is just so hard to trust with McCarthy. So good luck there. This game is really hard to predict accurately. I want to say it's a blowout for Washington, but then if they start Mariota and the Vikings defense shows up, it's possible that the Commanders defense shits the bed so bad that the Vikings actually win this game. So this one is kind of tough, but as long as Daniels plays, I would trust Daniels and Terry McLaurin. Ertz is okay, but every Viking, hard to believe, is safe with that quarterback. But now let's move on. The game in New Jersey is going to be pretty cold, and we know that the Dolphins offense is just not quite the same in bad weather. So it's not going to be snowing. It's not going to be windy. It's just going to be cold, 37 degrees. It's not the end of the world, but sometimes Tua does really shit the bed when it's cold, just even a little bit. So that's where I'm a little worried about the Dolphins in this game. I think this game is like a true toss-up because the Jets are starting to play a bit better with Tyrod lately. And after beating the Falcons, they definitely have some confidence in this matchup. So perhaps I'm getting it wrong. Maybe I'm overthinking it. But when you look at the stats, the Dolphins defense is a great spot for Tyrod Taylor. He could have a great game again. Last week was also a top 10 matchup. And then the running back position is a pretty neutral spot on the year. However, in the last month, it is bottom 10. It's trending down as of late. So I might be downgrading Breece Hall a little bit in this game. Might not expect or guarantee a touchdown. And then for receiver, it's been a bad spot on the season. However, in the last month, it's up to number 11. It's actually an easy matchup in the last month. So that's what I always thought. The Dolphins being a tough spot kind of sounded crazy. Entering the year, I didn't trust their secondary at all. So it was kind of weird that they were a tough matchup up until the last 4 games. So the weather kind of helped them for a while, and then some of their matchups were just weird. The Dolphins, I don't think will limit A.D. Mitchell or John Mechie too bad this week, but they're a very good spot for tight end, so I could see Mason Taylor pop off in this game. If you trust Tyrod Taylor, then maybe the Jets offense is going to step up. But when it comes to the Jets defense, it's an average matchup for Tua, so not a big downgrade, just the weather is the reason why. And if Tua sucks because of the weather, then maybe they look really good on defense. But on the year, they've been a top 5 upgrade for running backs, so Achane going to pop off in this one. But then bottom 10 matchup for receivers and tight ends. Maybe you don't trust anyone else other than Achane too much, given Tua might look terrible in the cold. But must start is Devon Achane, top 5 matchup for him. He's been a top 5 running back, so got to lock him into the lineup. That's a no-brainer there. And then the Dolphins, their defense has really stepped up lately, and it's the Jets opposite them. So I do think the Dolphins are a solid start. I endorsed them last week. It worked out. The week before, I think they were also not too bad. They were on bye, but the week before that, they weren't terrible. I know that the Dolphins have been okay in fantasy lately. So I think against the Jets, it's not the end of the world. You can definitely buy in and not feel too bad about it. They're not the best stash, though, for the playoffs. So maybe you'll ignore them, but the Jets are always an upgrade for defenses in fantasy. And then Waddle, I still think you have to go back to the well with. I don't think I can bench Waddle. Against the Jets, it's not a scary matchup. And even though Tua might be limited, it's not windy. It's not going to be windy in this game. It's just cold. So that's where I'm not going to overreact to the cold temperatures. Like Waddle, I still think will get enough volume to carry you, but I could see him blow up in your face. Last couple games, I've expected him to play well, and he has not. So Waddle could be a big liability, but at the moment, I still trust the volume to be incoming. And I don't think Tua will be so bad that Waddle can't do anything. So odds are I'll still start him, but he's going to be closer to like wide receiver 20-25 than wide receiver 15 this week. Not my favorite upgrade given the weather in New Jersey. But Breece Hall in a slightly difficult matchup. The Dolphins are bottom 10 as of late. Still, I think is a safe start. The volume has been good enough, and the production from a yard standpoint always kind of carries you. I always worry about touchdowns for Breece Hall, but in this matchup, even if he doesn't get it, I still think you'll get roughly 11, 12 points without the touchdown. I still think he's going to be fine against Miami. I think in the cold, the game script might benefit him, and he has been catching more passes. He's been better with Tyrod Taylor. So I like Breece Hall, I think, enough to start, but he's the only Jet I think is talented enough to be worth your time this week. But in terms of flex plays, I think Darren Waller is still a player I'm not going to forget about. The weather, I think, is a red flag, and this Jets matchup is bottom 10. But if you tell me Waller scores another touchdown, wouldn't be shocked at all. And last week, he did give you 47 yards on just 2 catches. So maybe not as good as I thought, but that's the baseline minimum that you can tolerate at tight end and still feel fine about starting. So if he also scores a touchdown on top of that, you're getting back to double digits. And I think Waller is one of the more valuable backup tight ends you can roster, but maybe after last week, you don't feel fully safe starting him, given this matchup is not an upgrade. So I'm still going to rank him like top 12. I don't think Waller is like that bad of a play, but not too many people have picked him up off the wire yet. So maybe you can still get him, and maybe you'll ignore him based on who else you have. But A.D. Mitchell was lights out last week, his only good game of his career, though. And up until last week, he was getting fewer targets and way less effective than John Mechie. So last week may have been his breakout game, maybe more indicative of what's going to come. And based on what they traded to acquire him, based on draft capital, I do think he has the higher upside in terms of his career. I don't think it's over. I could still see A.D. Mitchell play well down the stretch this season. So A.D. Mitchell, I think, is the more valuable option, but it could just be chasing points last week. A bit of recency bias definitely factors in here. And the matchup isn't quite good. On the year, it's bottom 10, but in the last month, it is top 12. So I think he's the more compelling option, but not a safe play at all. Just a flex option at best. And if you get burned, don't be surprised at all. That's what happened when I endorsed John Mechie as the safer play. But Mechie still had 8 targets last week. It just didn't work out in terms of his receptions and touchdowns, but I could easily see it come back to him. I don't think Tyrod Taylor is committed too much to either player between the two, but last week was better for Mitchell. He had 12 targets to Mechie's 8. And so for that reason, I think they're similar to each other, but I'd rather go with AD Mitchell. But I think they're moving the needle enough where Tyrod Taylor is kind of interesting this week. The matchup against the Dolphins is top 7, and last week he had 45 rushing yards and a touchdown. So if that continues, if Taylor continues to scramble, and especially near the goal line offers those Justin Fields touchdowns, then Taylor has some value. Don't pretend like he's irrelevant. In Superflex, I could see this be a good spot for Tyrod Taylor. So going to require some faith here, but if Mechie or AD Mitchell do contribute, you'll be pretty safe with your decision. And then I could see the rushing stats also keep you viable, might come close to 20 points against the Dolphins. It is a good spot, but maybe the weather is a problem. In general, I'm going to bench him, but in Superflex, I could see him have value given you might be in a deeper format and maybe desperate with 4 teams on bye. But the Jets, given the weather, are an interesting low-end option, but in general, I think I'm going to fade them. They haven't played well enough for me to trust, and very few turnovers that they've forced. So that's where the main value at defense is for fantasy. I think I'm going to bench the New York Jets, but they're kind of a dark horse candidate. There's a chance that Tua does shit the bed. He does not play the same in bad weather, but Mason Taylor is my more compelling long shot given the Dolphins matchup is top 3 this year. I could see Mason Taylor really play well. However, Jeremy Ruckert may have some chemistry with Tyrod Taylor that does burn you. Sometimes you know the matchup's good, and even though the logic makes sense, you just don't get that touchdown. Sometimes you get vultured by the backup. So Taylor, not a safe start, but the matchup is good enough. I would upgrade him significantly. I will probably rank him top 20, but probably not worth a pickup given his production this year. It feels hard to trust, but Jalen Wright might be very valuable. The Jets run defense is top 5 matchup, so he's the main backup behind Achane at the moment. I think I trust him a bit more than Ollie Gordon, but I don't feel safe starting a backup in Miami. So no thanks with him. Tua, I think could be fine, but could also be terrible. The weather is why I'll be benching Tua. I don't think you're trusting Tua in the first place, so more of a low-end streaming option. I'd rather go with Tyrod than Tagovailoa in this game. I don't trust Tua in the cold, so let's pass on him. I'm also going to pass on Malik Washington now that Waller's back. I don't trust the volume here. And then while Gordon could score a vulture touchdown, even if he does not get more than like 5 touches, so I'll pass on that. And then Dulcich didn't evaporate last week, but only 2 receptions. I would only trust Darren Waller. And Isaiah Davis is just like the last remaining piece in the Jets, but pretty irrelevant. I would bench him, no doubt about it. So those are my start sits for the Jets hosting Miami. It's pretty straightforward. The names you're typically trusting, Achane, Waddle, and Hall. But I do think the Dolphins are pretty compelling. The Jets matchup is good, but if you don't want to stash them for the playoffs, I understand ignoring them. And then in terms of flex plays, I'm not convinced yet that AD Mitchell or Mechie are super safe, but there has been a valuable Jets receiver, at least one, in each of the last 3 weeks. I think that'll repeat yet again. But Waller, I think, is the safer bet over all of them. Waller, I think, is more likely to score a touchdown than Mitchell or Mechie, but Mason Taylor could pop off in a good matchup. That's it for this game. Let's move on. And now we are coming up on a lot of divisional matchups. Down the stretch, there's a lot of divisional games, and sometimes the defenses really step up. Sometimes there's a lot less offense than you would think. But if there's one divisional matchup I'm not that worried about in that respect, it would be this one, because neither defense is a good one. On the year, the Saints, the only position that gets a slight downgrade would be quarterback. It does rank as a bottom 12 matchup on the year. If you look at the last month, it's down to number 25. So not the best spot for Baker, but still I think Baker's going to be fine. Otherwise, it's neutral for running backs, neutral for receivers, and neutral for tight ends. But in the last month, it's down to number 27 in this regard. So tight ends is actually getting a big downgrade, a bottom 6 matchup, last 4 games against the Saints. But when it comes to Tampa, not only is it top 6 on the year, in the last month, the Bucs have allowed the most fantasy points to the quarterback position. But that game from Josh Allen with 6 touchdowns, 3 on the ground, definitely skews these numbers a bit. So maybe it's not that good of a matchup. I wouldn't trust Shuck to play as well as Josh Allen. For running backs, it's top 11. They have struggled this year in that department. Also top 11 for wide receivers. And in the last month, it's been elite up to number 3. The Bucs secondary is ass at the moment, but it's a neutral spot for tight ends, so no big downgrade or upgrade for Juwan Johnson. But last time we saw this matchup, the Buccaneers won this game on defense almost entirely, and they would have had a second defensive touchdown if not for the ref calling it back. So I'm going to trust them again. While that was against Spencer Rattler, I don't think Shuck is that much better, and I do trust Tampa in division to really shut them down. The Bucs' path for the playoffs is through the division, and I expect them to win comfortably. The Bucs are an elite start. This week, I'd probably rank them top 3. Bucky Irving, though, played pretty well, and he was still coming back. So in his first game, maybe that's not going to be his best of the season, and I think down the stretch, he'll really contribute a lot. So the Saints, not a bad matchup, a neutral one. I will be starting Bucky, no doubt about it, in Tampa. But Baker going to stay in my lineup. While he's been a bit lackluster lately, I still don't care. I'm going to keep starting Baker Mayfield. His receiving core is about to get much healthier. Maybe they'll hold off until the real playoffs, but in the next coming weeks, I think Baker will get some life support, and his fantasy stats will be elite down the stretch. But Egbuka, not going to lie, I'm a bit worried about Egbuka. I didn't really consider even benching him last week, and he was bad. So now that is part of my logic, and this is a big wait-and-see game. But I don't want to bench him just yet. I think that's an overreaction in this offense. There's still a lot of upside, and given the matchup against New Orleans, I can't think of a reason to fade him. So it hasn't quite been there, but he's still getting the most volume among any Bucs pass catcher. And if you're the number one with Baker, I don't think I can bench you. So I know it's been disappointing. He hasn't had a good game in almost a month now, and I could see it blow up in your face. But this week, I'm still going to put Egbuka in the lineup. But if you've already clinched a playoff spot, I would understand benching him just to get it out of your system. It's been a bit rough lately, and if he's going to continue to be this bad, then you want to be benching him moving forward. And I'd like to know if I'm comfortable with that decision or not. So this is like a wait and see game. But because he's been so good, I'm waiting to see if I should bench him or not. Until I know, I'm going to keep starting Egbuka. So I know I ranked him too high last week, but I'm still probably going to rank him top 20 in this matchup. But Olave scares me a little bit. If the Bucs defense wasn't so bad, then I wouldn't feel too confident, because up until this point, there was no competition for targets. Now, Devon Vele actually contributes a little bit. So Olave never really scores touchdowns. Hard to bet on that. And in division, I could see the Bucs really shut down their opponent. So not the safest play, but volume typically keeps him in the lineup. Just like Egbuka, I'm still probably going to start Olave. Going to be closer to wide receiver 25, but still ranked high enough to start. But I could see Devon Vele be a big problem for him down the stretch. Last week, Vele had 8 targets, caught 7 of them, and was hyper productive in full PPR and really any format. He also scored a touchdown under Tyler Shuck. That is maybe something to read into. They trade away Shaheed, and then they acquired Vele earlier this year. Maybe they have plans for Devon Vele. So a name to consider. This Bucs matchup is elite. In the last month, it's number 3. So that's a big upgrade. Maybe Vele is a solid flex option, but I don't feel comfortable endorsing him. I'm still of the belief that Olave is the guy you'd rather have. So good luck with Vele, but maybe worth a pickup. I'd rather go him than Devin Neal, because even though Devin Neal had a lot of volume last week, 17 total touches, 3 of them were receptions, the production was pretty bad. It was just like Alvin Kamara. You got less than 9 points on that volume. So despite a good matchup, I'm not trusting a touchdown for Devin Neal. And for that reason, just a low-end flex play, I'd probably bench him despite a good matchup. But Chris Godwin had a good game last week. Maybe he's fully healthy now and will be playing really well down the stretch. And maybe that's the reason I should be benching Egbuka. But Egbuka still had more targets, and Godwin I don't think is 100% either. So maybe he's going to play lights out. Maybe he's the player we remember last year, but I doubt it. And especially if Evans or McMillan come back soon, it'll be too crowded. So I don't think Godwin is a lock in the lineup. Let's see a second good game before we consider him a top 30 play. But Juwan Johnson is an okay flex play because in general, he offers a very safe floor. In full PPR though, last week he didn't put up even 10 points. And I could see this matchup being slightly difficult for him. Given in division, I expect the Bucs to really shut him down. So it's better everywhere else than tight end. And for that reason, I think Shuck might be looking to Vele. If Vele didn't break out last week, I would trust Juwan with a clear start consideration. But now that Vele's there, it's not as safe, and I could see the volumes start to dissipate as the weeks go by. So the bar is lower at tight end, but he's going to be just a flex play, not a lock in the top 10. Tight end is kind of deep And this week, I don't think the matchup's good enough to fully endorse. But Tyler Shuck could be a sneaky long shot here. The Bucs defense is a great spot for tight end, top 6 on the year. So it's not just the Josh Allen game, but odds are in division, I'll bench him. It could be as ugly as Spencer Rattler looked against Tampa a few weeks ago. So no thanks there, but maybe if Vele is legit, he could be more tempting. And then Jalen McMillan is my long shot for the Bucs, but I don't expect him to play. There is a chance he comes back to the practice field this week, and off the neck injury, they might be a little cautious with him, but I do think when he's available, he could be lights out, and I think he'll be healthier sooner than Mike Evans. So reports say that both of them might be practicing this week, but I doubt either will play. Evans would probably be safer to start, but given Evans' age, I think they might save him for the playoffs or like must-win games against Carolina, their biggest threat in the division. So Evans, I do not expect to play this week. If one of them would, I would assume it's McMillan, but I don't think either does. I don't think it's early enough for them to be healthy. So no thanks with them, but a name to consider. Rashad White, I would bench now that Bucky's there. I'm not going to feel safe enough. And then Sean Tucker, that's a big reason why. Still contributing a little bit. And him and Rashad White are behind Bucky. Too far behind to trust. So no thanks there. The matchup is also bad for Cade Otton lately. It's terrible. In the last month, it's bottom 6. So no thank you on Cade Otton this week. And then Taysom Hill, I still believe in, but at this point, I kind of feel like maybe he's so injured coming off of last year. So no thanks. I'm going to bench him, but at tight end, the bar's kind of low. At some point, he'll have a breakout game, but not this week. I wouldn't bet on it. Against the Saints, however, I would trust Baker in that offense. I'm going to bench New Orleans. Even in division, I'll pass. But Tez Johnson going to be very unvaluable if Mike Evans and McMillan return to the lineup. Now that Godwin's healthy, I'd pass on Tez Johnson. But Kamara, I assume, will miss again. I don't think Kamara is healthy enough to trust. And even if he was healthy, not going to go over 10 points. It never really happens with Kamara this season. So that's it for this game. For the most part, you're only starting the Buccaneers. Devon Vele and Devin Neal, though, names to keep on the radar with a good schedule down the stretch. Our next matchup is in division, and this will definitely decide who will be in the driver's seat in the AFC South. So I could see the Texans actually still catch them, but this game is so important for playoff implications, and the loser is actually at a big threat of missing the playoffs, especially if the Colts lose. That would be tough. So let's look at the defensive matchups real quick. The Colts defense is actually kind of tough against quarterbacks and running backs, but on the year, it's a little bit less difficult than lately. In the last month, the Colts are down to number 27 against quarterbacks. So a bottom 6 matchup. When it comes to running backs, though, it's the opposite. It's getting much easier. In the last 4 games, it's up to number 9. It's a top 10 spot against the Colts run defense. So that's maybe some optimism here for Travis Etienne and Baishal Tutin. You could get some good production out of the running backs of the Jaguars. But at receiver, this matchup is misleading. In the last month, it's number 20, so no longer top 10. More of a difficult spot in the passing game against the Colts. But for tight ends, it's number 6 on the season. In the last month, though, it's number 17, but we did just see Dalton Schultz play very well. No touchdown for him, but a lot of yards. I still think against the Colts, tight ends are going to play well. So on the year, I'm more willing to trust that at the tight end spot. Recency bias is not as indicative. I'm more interested in the season-long stats for tight end defenses. But when it comes to the Jags defense, they're a great spot for quarterbacks this year, top 10. However, in the last month, down to number 18. That game against Justin Herbert really does help them. And then last week, they did play very well against Cam Ward. So matchups are kind of the main factor, but if they can stop Herbert, then maybe they can stop Daniel Jones, and they can definitely stop the run game. But against Jonathan Taylor, a matchup-proof player, I probably don't give a shit. However, against receiver, it's a neutral matchup. On the season, it's 15th. However, in the last month, it's number 22. A little more difficult to throw the ball against the Jags. But where you can throw it and really dominate is when you throw it to the tight end. In the last month, it's down to number 11, but still a big upgrade. That's still a advantageous spot for Tyler Warren. So I think Tyler Warren is a lock in the lineup, absolutely no-brainer. He's been a top 5 tight end this season, and I was never benching him in the first place. But I think he could dominate this week. I expect a touchdown, and I think he'll give you at least 50, 60-plus yards against the Jaguars. Great spot for Tyler Warren. But despite the downgrade for Jonathan Taylor, I don't care. I'm never benching him, so that's a no-brainer. But Michael Pittman, maybe not as elite. However, he's been so consistent this year, and last week was a much tougher matchup. I'm not going to buy in and believe that last week was indicative of what's going to come with Pittman. Odds are he gets back in the end zone, and Daniel Jones really trusts him. So not going to bench Pittman. The Jags secondary isn't scary enough to do that. And for that reason, I'm also going to start Alec Pierce. Have you been watching Alec Pierce? Every reception for Alec Pierce is like a major highlight reel type of play. He's a really underrated player. I've been hyping him up all season. I liked him coming out of college, but it took a while to really believe in him. He's a really good athlete. If you pull up his player profiler page, maybe I'll pull it up later this week in the rankings, he's really athletic, and it really shows. He's dominant down the field, and I trust him to catch those deep passes. At least one or two usually gives him like 45 yards on just 2 receptions. He usually is very safe down the field. So I like him a lot. I could see a touchdown for him again this week. I want a second Colts receiver typically, and I like Alec Pierce quite a bit. So if the Jags really do limit Taylor, Daniel Jones has to throw it pretty well, and he's been really good connecting with Alec Pierce. So I would start him, but when it comes to the Jags, I'm going to start Travis Etienne this week. The matchup on the year isn't great, but in the last month, like I mentioned, it is top 6. So I'm going to trust Etienne. While he could get vultured by Tootin again this week, I still think Etienne will bounce back. Last week was a bit rough, but I still trust him at the end of the day. But Brenton Strange is earning a lot of respect. I started him over Kittle last week. I was worried about the weather, and despite not having more yards than Kittle, that was the right call. A touchdown did work out on Brenton Strange. And when you look at this matchup on the year, it's top 6. So let's start and endorse Brenton Strange. I would expect high yardage from Strange yet again this week. So given some upside, I could see Trevor Lawrence be a really good play. If Strange does score a touchdown, then I think Lawrence might be a top 10 play this week. But given the matchup against Indy is bottom 10 on the year, I think he's just a flex option. Last week, I endorsed him as a good top 10 play, and that was a good call. It did work out. But against the Colts, I could see it kind of burn you. This might be a more defensive battle. So I'm not dying to like lock in both quarterbacks. I think it might be a little more turnover prone than you think. But Lawrence, I do think will win the game, and I would rather go Trevor Lawrence than Daniel Jones. But I am endorsing like almost every Colts pass catcher. By correlation, Daniel Jones should be a safe play. However, I'm a bit worried about his leg injury, and for that reason, I don't expect many rushing yards. That's why I think he throws it more, and that's why I think he also could turn it over. I think Daniel Jones might have like 3 turnovers in this game. So he could also have like 300 yards. It might be reminiscent of that Steelers game that they lost, but I still think Jones is a solid flex option. Both of these guys are tempting, but I think Trevor Lawrence might have more upside this week with more rushing stats. But I do think Brian Thomas Jr. and Jacoby Myers are very legit flex plays this week. The Colts secondary would be scary if Sauce Gardner was available, but he's not. So I want to believe that this top 10 matchup is legit, and on the year, it's typically been an upgrade against the Colts. So given their injuries, I think Brian Thomas could play well, but last week he was kind of an afterthought. If anything, Jacoby Myers was the guy you wanted. And with the injury to Parker Washington, I trust Jacoby Myers a lot more moving forward. But then there's also Brenton Strange in the mix, and that could be a problem. Myers did most of his damage last week on just 1 reception, and then they rewarded him on the next play with another target that turned into a touchdown. So it was almost just 1 drive exclusively why Myers was the better play last week. But he was still heavily involved, and they traded for him for a reason. Brian Thomas not fully healthy, so Myers I could see actually be more valuable than Brian Thomas. But based on name value, I still trust Thomas more than Jacoby, and that's why I'm probably going to rank him a little bit higher. But they might be back-to-back. I could see high value for both of them. And maybe after last week, you trust Jacoby Myers a little bit more. Not going to lie, I actually dropped Jacoby Myers last week because I needed the space. I had a lot of good options on my bench. And while obviously I regret it, I also had Brenton Strange, and I did not want to roster 2 Jaguars receivers. So it is what it is. I definitely wish I still had Myers, but last week was kind of hard to believe it'll repeat. So you could get burned chasing points. I'm not dying to consider Myers a must start. But back-to-back games with a touchdown, he is playing pretty well, has good chemistry with Trevor Lawrence. But I think the defenses are really interesting. Divisional games are often weird, and because the Colts have never won in Jacksonville in the last 10 years, it's been an 0-10 record since 2014. I think the Jags will win, and for that reason, I think they're more valuable than the Colts. But in division, anything can happen. I'm expecting turnovers for both quarterbacks. So while I do prefer Jacksonville, I could also see a massive shootout, and this game is either going to be like 20-17 Jacksonville, or it'll be like 38-35 in favor of the Colts. The only way the Colts win, I think, is by shootout. So there's a chance these two teams totally shit the bed in fantasy on defense. But I think my preference would be Jacksonville, but against the juggernaut like the Colts, I would assume it's more likely a high-scoring game. I think I'm going to bench both defenses in this game. But Josh Downs, a little bit tricky, pretty touchdown dependent, and if he doesn't get it, you probably get burned. So as much as I like Josh Downs, I still think Alec Pierce is better. Alec Pierce has been more involved lately, and I'm starting to trust him more. So Downs is okay, but not my favorite play. I think I'd rather just bench him. And then DJ Giddens not getting any work. He is the handcuff, though, to Jonathan Taylor. But Baishal Tutin, maybe more of an interesting long shot candidate, but so touchdown dependent. And against the Colts, I don't think they're just going to let him cruise into the end zone. But it has been a good matchup lately. Maybe I'm underestimating Baishal Tutin. He might be more of a legit flex option than I give him credit for. Here in the ranks, though, I doubt he's going to crack the top 30. Odds are I'd still be benching Baishal Tutin. But Parker Washington on the injury report might not play, did exit early last week. If he does not, I trust Myers, Thomas, and Strange even more. He was getting like 7 targets per game before going down. So that's it for this Jaguars-Colts game. I think it'll be a very close one, and I think we'll get a lot more offense than defense in this matchup. In Baltimore, we have one of the most heated rivalries in sports for well over 2 decades now, and odds are these games are hyper dependent on defense and turnovers. That's really the name of the game in a Ravens-Steelers matchup. It's nothing but defense typically. So I don't really like what I'm seeing from at least the Steelers defense lately. If you look at their stats, number 8 matchup for quarterbacks, 18th for running backs, but in the last month, it's actually top 7. And then for receivers, it's top 5 on the year. It's down to 14 lately, but still an upgrade. And then for tight ends, it's 4th best matchup on the season. In the last month, it ranks 22nd. So that's the only difficult matchup in the last month against Pittsburgh. But Baltimore has been getting much more difficult as of late. They start off so easy to run and throw against, but now they're at least average in most departments. Number 17 against quarterbacks, but in the last month, it's actually down to number 22. When it comes to this running back matchup, it's 13th on the year, but down to 24th in the last month, so not a good spot, bottom 10. And then while it's top 10 on the year for receivers, it actually ranks neutral, number 17 in the last month. So not as easy as you might think. And then tight ends is actually a bottom 10 matchup on the year. So maybe the Ravens defense really shuts down the Steelers, but I still think Pittsburgh will shut down Lamar Jackson. So I am absolutely starting both defenses. Baltimore, I think, is a lock in your lineup. Against Aaron Rodgers at home, that's a no-brainer, but I do believe that Mike Tomlin's defense is not going to roll over, and in this spot, Mike Tomlin has Lamar Jackson's number. So I'm going to start both defenses. I think the Steelers win the game, and even if they don't, it's a very close, low-scoring final score, and I do trust them. From a floor standpoint, I think Pittsburgh and Baltimore don't give up many points, and then likely force many turnovers as well. So I like Pittsburgh and Baltimore this week. I think they're both top 10, but I'm still going to trust Derrick Henry despite my endorsement of Pittsburgh. This running back matchup has been a good one. In the last month, it is up to number 7. So although at times they do step up, I could see a fumble from Derrick Henry this week. I would still start him, and I would still expect an easy touchdown from Derrick Henry. It'll be low scoring, but not so low scoring. There are no touchdowns at all. Give me Henry to still be a top 10 play. But Mark Andrews last week did not quite pay off, but just signed a big contract extension and has been way more safe of an option than Isaiah Likely this season. So I'm still going to start Andrews. I think he's earned a top 10 play. Most of the time, it's hard to bench Mark Andrews, but this matchup is the main reason why it does rank top 4 on the year. So that's why I'm going to trust him. I would expect a touchdown and some decent yards, but it is getting a little tougher lately. However, I could see it burn you because Lamar Jackson has not been a safe play at all. And Lamar plays terribly against Pittsburgh, so I would more likely bench him in a one quarterback league. But in Superflex, no doubt about it, he's still in the lineup. He would still be in my top 15 more likely than not. But odds are you have a real decision this week on Lamar, and that's not what you expected when you drafted him. So he's no longer a stud. He's not 100% healthy. He's not playing well. And against the Bengals last week, he was pretty terrible. I could see him be even worse against Pittsburgh. If anyone knows how to stop him, it's usually Mike Tomlin. Lamar has a losing record against Tomlin. He plays very poorly in this divisional matchup. So I would likely just bench him. I don't think he's a safe play at all. But maybe based on your other options, you are stuck with Lamar in the lineup. But Zay Flowers, I don't think is as safe either. Given this matchup, I could see Lamar really be limited. And if the Steelers are starting to get better in one category, it's at stopping receivers and tight ends. So not ideal. I think Flowers might be not scoring a touchdown this week, and for that, limited upside. But in general, he's been a safe floor play, with the exception of last week and like week 3. There are very few games where Flowers goes under 60 yards on the game. So a decent floor play at flex, but I wouldn't expect a touchdown this week. I'm not going to upgrade Zay Flowers against Pittsburgh. But Jaylen Warren probably going to have to contribute tremendously, and the Ravens aren't the best matchup at this moment. So I might just be flexing Jaylen Warren, not going to upgrade him as much as I did last week. He wasn't as good as I thought, but he still scored a touchdown, and that's really the only way he can pay off at this point. The volume is fine, but the efficiency isn't impressive, and it's also a bit of a committee in Pittsburgh. So needs a touchdown. You might not get it, just a flex play this week. And DK Metcalf at this point is really hard to trust. Very limited production. It's been a while since he's had a touchdown streak. So Metcalf, I probably would bench. I'd rather go Flowers this week, and I don't feel too hot about Flowers either. So likely going to bench him, but still a starting receiver, so that still has some value. But last week, Keaton Mitchell scored a touchdown, could have another house call, could be an interesting long shot, but mainly just handcuff value in fantasy down the stretch. But in DFS, maybe it works out again. The Steelers defense isn't that scary. But then Calvin Austin gets a good matchup here. The Steelers are bad against receivers. So as a deep threat, I think he's more interesting than Roman Wilson, but that could definitely pivot in his favor, and maybe Austin is not the guy you want. So definitely just bench him. Only in DFS would I consider it. But the matchup isn't terrible against the Ravens. But Kenny Gainwell might score a touchdown. Last week, though, I was very wrong endorsing him, so don't want to get burned again. As a backup, I think I'll just bench him. But could easily see another touchdown for Kenny Gainwell. If the Steelers are going to win, their run game needs to play well, and Gainwell might get some checkdowns that turn into a touchdown. Hopefully Gainwell does contribute, but I think I'd bench him in fantasy. But Darnell Washington starting to emerge as the main tight end to own. So this Ravens matchup is bad, but I would maybe at least keep him on the watch list. Washington has been hard to tackle lately, but Isaiah likely fumbled through the end zone, so odds are he's in the doghouse. Probably not coming back to him. But the matchup isn't bad. But Rodgers, I don't trust at all. Going to have way too many handoffs. The Ravens matchup is tougher lately, so I'll pass on Rodgers. And I'm also passing on Freiermuth and Jonnu. I think they're behind Darnell Washington at this point. I don't trust either Steelers tight end. But Justice Hill is on IR. Rashad Bateman has been out for a while, so not expecting him to come back soon. And those are the last players I would even think about in this matchup. You're only trusting Henry, Andrews, and the defenses. Once we hit Lamar, Flowers, Warren, and DK, they're just flex plays that I'd honestly rather bench if I could. I see a very low-scoring game. That's why I want both defenses. But then in Las Vegas, another divisional matchup. This one is not as heated of a rivalry, and I don't think it'll go like it did the first time. If you rewind to the first Broncos-Raiders matchup, the Broncos really didn't care enough to show up. They played on Thursday off a big win, and then they had the Chiefs game the week after, and I think they were just looking ahead. They did not take their opponent seriously, and they won 10-7 against Las Vegas. So wouldn't expect that to repeat. If anything, the Raiders defense is trash this year, and when it comes to Bo Nix, he gets an average upgrade, slightly better than neutral. And then against running backs, it's a top 12 matchup. For receivers, it's top 6. And then for tight ends, that's the only tough spot. It's bottom 3 against tight ends. So if there's one position I'm benching against Vegas, it's tight end. Everyone else, I'm typically starting. If they're usually in my lineup, they should be great against the Raiders. But the Broncos defense is terrible. Bottom 3 for quarterbacks, so Geno got to bench him. Bottom 6 for running backs, so Genty gets a downgrade, but enough volume to still probably carry him. And then for wide receiver, it was starting to get easier when Surtain went down. That 3-game stretch, they were actually just an average defense. But last week with Surtain coming back, they didn't stop Terry or Mariota. So maybe they're not as good as you think, but on the year, they're still bottom 5. And in my opinion, it's still a major downgrade for the Raiders passing game. So no thanks there, but a top 12 matchup for tight ends. Lately, the Broncos are actually very vulnerable in that department. They shut down Bowers the first time, but I could see them shit the bed and give up a lot of points to Bowers this week. In the last month, this top 12 matchup on the season actually ranks top 3. They have been getting demolished by opposing tight ends. Zach Ertz fucking torched them last week. So let's tell you who I'm starting. The Broncos defense is a no-brainer. Against Geno Smith, the Broncos were already in your lineup. Now they're going to be ranked number 1 overall. The Broncos are the best start against Las Vegas. But RJ Harvey, a lock in the lineup, 2 touchdowns for him last week. Despite limited yardage, he was still lights out. I ranked him pretty high, and that did pay off. Harvey will be even better, I think, in a good matchup again against Las Vegas. He should get another touchdown, if not 2. I trust Harvey. I think he'll have over 100 yards from scrimmage as well. But Bo Nix, I think, is worth a start this week. Not a downgrade in the Las Vegas matchup. I think will be easy. In that first game, why he was so bad, not only were they looking ahead, the wind was also a big factor. There was a lot of wind. On Thursday, weird shit happened. So I think he'll bounce back. I think he'll play better. And last week he had over 300 yards. I think he'll do something similar against the Raiders. I don't trust their defense at all. So start Bo Nix, maybe a low-end top 10 play, but I think a top 10 play this week, at least top 12, that's a player I would start in a regular format. But Cortland Sutton definitely had a better game last week, so in a top 6 matchup, I will start him. I would assume it goes well, but when I endorsed him against the Raiders last time, he did shit the bed. I doubt it'll happen a second time in a row, but maybe this is a Troy Franklin game, not a Sutton game. But last week, it went in his favor. I think you have to believe in him a little bit more after last week. But Bowers, always a lock in the lineup. The matchup is elite in the last month, so Denver not going to lock him down this time. I would expect at least 1, if not 2 touchdowns for Bowers this week. And then Ashton Genty, I just think you have to start. The volume is too high, especially in the passing game. He has a lot of PPR value. And in general, even without a touchdown, he's still giving you like 8 or 9 points. And that's usually a top 25 running back at the worst. Like at worst, Genty's a high-end flex play. But in division, I could also see a touchdown and him pay off well. He will get at least like 19 touches against Denver. But the only other player I'm considering to flex this week is Troy Franklin, who I did endorse big time last week, and he did shit the bed. I apologize. He was kind of the only Bronco that did not pay off. So maybe it was game script. Maybe it just didn't work out. The Commanders, shockingly, held him in check. So now I'm not as confident in Franklin, but he has played well at times this year. I still think he's a good flex play. The matchup's top 6, and I still think he's going to be ranked top 35 at receiver. So I still think a decent play, but last week was a bad call. I apologize on Troy Franklin. But where I was right was endorsing Ingram. I endorsed like every Broncos pass catcher last week, at least the main ones. And Ingram really paid off with a lot of yardage. But I've been very reluctant to endorse Ingram most of the time this season. Unless he's in a great matchup, I don't trust him to go over 6 points. He might give you 40 yards reliably, but that's just the minimum you can trust. And in this matchup, it's a really bad one. You should be giving him a major downgrade against Las Vegas. So I'll just outright bench him. You may have not even picked him up to play last week, despite the good matchup. So he's kind of on the periphery. He's okay, but rarely scoring touchdowns. I would fade him in a bad matchup. I wouldn't upgrade Evan Ingram, but Jaleel McLaughlin might score another vulture touchdown, but in general, I only trust Harvey, so no thanks with Jaleel McLaughlin. And then Marvin Mims, not my preferred long shot candidate at receiver. Instead, I'm going to go Pat Bryant, who I think in the slot might be a bit more tempting. I think Bo Nix is going to have a good game. And the matchup's great for receivers against Las Vegas. So if I had to pick one other than Sutton and Franklin, it would be Pat Bryant over Marvin Mims. But my long shot for the Raiders is Michael Mayer because the Broncos cannot stop tight ends right now. It's a top 12 matchup on the year. And mainly in the last month or so, it's just been so good. So that's where he could contribute if he's healthy. Maybe he might be worth your time, but only in DFS, and odds are he's not even healthy enough to play. He did miss last week. So no thanks on Mayer. Most likely he's irrelevant. But then Trey Tucker and Tyler Lockett, not safe starts at all. Against the Broncos secondary, it's a terrible matchup. I will bench both Tucker and Lockett. But Betch might still run some routes in the slot this week. I would definitely fade him, though. Not safe at all. I'm still waiting for Dante Thornton, but Thornton is definitely behind these three wide receivers. But Geno against the Broncos, fuck that shit. No effing chance. And then Las Vegas against Bo Nix and Sean Payton, I will pass. They should bounce back heavy, play much better on offense this time around. So wind is not going to help them. Definitely bench Las Vegas. So when it comes to this matchup, I think you're starting the more obvious Broncos in your lineup. Harvey, Bo Nix, I think is fine, and Sutton, I think should be started. But the Broncos defense a must start. Bowers always a lock, and Genty reluctantly still going to start him this week. Franklin, I think, is the only flex play though. I'd be benching Ingram and everyone else other than Troy Franklin. But still, we keep going with another divisional matchup, and this one has a lot of history behind it. And I am very worried about the weather impacting this game because it's going to be the coldest game on the week. While it's not expected to be snowing, the forecast can always change over the course of the week. And despite limited wind, it's going to be so cold, any wind will feel like it's freezing. It's 14 degrees in Green Bay this week, and I don't think that'll help the offense. I think it'll be more of a run-first approach, and if you get hit, you might really be in pain a little more than extra. It's not easy to play in frigid temperatures. So this will be a big test of Chicago. Are the Bears truly legit? If they win this game, I think they're a lock to win the division. If they split the series with the Packers, I don't see them losing their stranglehold on the NFC North. So good for Chicago to make it this far and be the 1 seed. Really impressive from them. And I'm a believer in their offense, but their defense is a different story. This matchup for quarterbacks is top 11, so Jordan Love might be a decent start this week. For running backs, it's neutral. In the last month, it does rank 21st, but still not that scary overall. For wide receivers, it's been a great matchup this year. However, they did just get Jalen Johnson back, and while he limited Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown fucking torched him. So maybe it's not as easy, but still overall, maybe not the scariest. The weather, I think, is more of a reason to fade the Packers in the passing game. But for tight end, it's also neutral, number 17. So maybe Luke Musgrave does contribute in this matchup. But for the Packers defense, they're a juggernaut, especially against quarterbacks. It's a bottom 4 matchup. So big downgrade for Caleb Williams, and the weather not going to help him. It's bottom 10 for running backs, but the Bears run it down your throat. So I kind of will still start the Bears. I don't think I care about the Packers defense here. And then it's been neutral for receivers and tight ends, number 19 on the year. But at receiver, it's down to number 27 lately. It's a very difficult matchup, bottom 6. And then in the last month, tight end actually ranks bottom 2. It's getting very, very difficult. The Packers defense is playing elite in the last month. And even on the season, they're pretty tough. So that's where I'm going to start them. Given the temperature, I see a very low scoring game. I'm going to trust that the Packers defense are a safe start this week. But I could see it blow up in your face like the Eagles did last week. Swift and Monangai are scary. Both went over 100 yards and a touchdown last week. I'm still starting Monangai. I don't see his role changing very much. This team wants to run the ball. I don't see a good matchup for throwing it this week. So I'm expecting a lot of volume for Swift and Monangai. They probably run it 40 times combined yet again. So after last week, I'm not going to bench him. Give me Swift in the lineup as a top 15 option. And then I think Monangai will be at worst a very high-end flex play, but odds are will crack my top 20. I think I want to be starting Kyle Monangai as well. You could tell me he's going to be better than Swift this week, and I wouldn't be shocked at all. So I want both of them in the lineup. When it comes to Jordan Love, though, it's kind of hard to believe that what he did last week will repeat. He plays so much better in indoor games, and with the temperature and the receiving core really banged up, I don't want to trust him against Chicago as much. But the matchup is good. So maybe he's more of a legit flex play. He's going to be more like quarterback 15 or 16 for me this week, not top 12. And for that reason, I'd probably just bench him in a one quarterback league. But the matchup is good. It does indicate maybe he'll be okay. But Christian Watson going to draw Jalen Johnson, so I'm going to likely fade him, definitely bump him down the rankings, and maybe just straight up bench him. I could see him really shit the bed if Jalen Johnson is back to the lockdown corner. We remember, but last week, A.J. Brown really torched him, so maybe it's not as good of coverage as I think. But A.J. Brown is much better than Christian Watson. So that is hard to fully gauge, but I still think Watson is the more valuable Packers receiver. But Odunze is so hard to trust. I think he's going to qualify for the flex territory, but odds are I'd bench him. I'd feel really gross starting Odunze. He's been so untrustworthy, and it's not like what we thought we were getting back in September. So maybe you still trust him, but I can't imagine you do. And honestly, I wanted to put him in the clear sit territory, but I just couldn't. He's still the number one receiver in Chicago, and I still think that's probably going to be top 35. At worst, top 40, and that's still a player to consider flexing. But I'd rather go Christian Watson. And against Jalen Johnson, that is saying quite a lot. But I could see Jalen Johnson shut down Watson so much that Wicks is still very valuable. Last week was so good, I can't envision they give up on Dontavian Wicks, but it's all going to depend on the health of other receivers. Jaden Reed is still on IR. I don't think he's coming back this week, so I don't think that'll limit Wicks enough. And then Matthew Golden also missed last week. I don't think he'll play either. So that's a big reason why Wicks had so many targets and routes. He played really well. And I could see as the third receiving option, him get forgotten about again and really contribute. He looked really good last week. So reluctant long shot candidate. I'd be pretty embarrassed if I was starting him, but I could see him play well yet again. However, my main long shot in this game is the Bears defense. I think the weather really helps them, and I could see Love turn it over. So their defense is getting better. It's still not great, but it is getting better, and I could see the weather just help you so much. It's a low scoring game in division, big rivalry with the division on the line, basically. I like Chicago as an interesting flex option at defense, but odds are you'll not start him. Odds are I'm going to hold off until next week. They get the Browns, and they'll be a must start. But this week, maybe just like number 15 to 20, more likely than not. But Emmanuel Wilson, given the weather, might be getting extra looks. The Bears' run defense is getting better, but Jacobs needs to give up some looks on the goal line, and odds are that doesn't happen. So Wilson, a long shot, but probably not worth a start. And then Caleb in this matchup, I just don't trust. Caleb is very inaccurate. Sometimes he runs and scrambles a lot, but touchdowns are hard to bet on. And given how Odunze's been playing, I don't trust a specific receiver to pay off. And against Green Bay, it's been a really tough matchup on the year for quarterbacks. Bottom four, I will pass. I think this is one of the few weeks where Caleb might be turning it over at least once. He rarely has any turnovers, but this week it might happen. So I'll fade him. When he has a bad game, it's really bad. When it's good, it's great, but he's too high variance. I'll pass against Green Bay. But DJ Moore, also high variance with him, very inconsistent. I'm going to pass. If I'm benching Caleb, I'd like to bench Odunze. I'm definitely benching DJ Moore, but his tight ends are hard to trust week to week. Loveland, I still think is more valuable, but Kmet scored a touchdown instead. So I'm going to bench both of them against Green Bay. It's the second toughest matchup lately, so no thanks there. And then Dobbs, it just isn't as exciting as Dontavian Wicks. So could be more valuable. Probably going to bench all of them, but I think I'd rather go Wicks than Dobbs. And if Reed comes back, I'd rather go Jaden Reed, definitely, over both of them. But Musgrave has a decent matchup, but hasn't done shit this year, so not going to trust him. Had one reception last week. Not worth it with Musgrave. But Reed, I don't think is healthy enough to play yet, so let's fade him. I think he'll be back by week 16, but this week I think he's still on IR. Maybe he comes back next week, but this week I doubt it. Golden, I also doubt will play. He did not in week 13. So that's it for this matchup. The weather, I think, is such a problem. I don't see much offense, but I think the second game at Chicago in a couple weeks, that one is much more likely to be a high-scoring game. This one, I think, will be more low-scoring and more defense from both sides. On Sunday afternoon, yet another divisional matchup. Once again, the Arizona Cardinals are hosting the LA Rams, and I think the Rams are going to have a major bounce back on offense. Last week was such a weird fluke. Stafford had not just an interception, but also a pick six on his second interception. And then he also had a fumble. That's not going to happen. The Rams offense going to be much better typically. So against Arizona, I do not fear this defense. No matchup is that scary. Against quarterback, it's bottom 10, but against Stafford, I don't give a shit. Against running back, it's top 10, so that's good. Against wide receiver, it's also bottom 10, but with Puka and Adams, who the fuck cares? And then for tight end, it's top 8. I could see Colby Parkinson score another touchdown. So Arizona's been a good matchup typically, and other than quarterbacks that throw interceptions, they are usually a good spot. So I am definitely starting Matthew Stafford, no doubt about it. I'm expecting a big bounce back. And given Brissett's track record lately, I would also start Jacoby Brissett. Last week, 300 yards, and despite the Rams being a bottom 10 matchup, we just saw Bryce Young light them up, and in the last month, they're down to number 16 in this category. It's actually a neutral matchup. The Rams secondary, not as scary. They can rush the passer pretty well, but Darnold's 4 interceptions skew some of these matchup stats. So Brissett has been so safe, I'm definitely starting him. And then players that are locks are Puka, Adams, and McBride. No fucking chance you're benching any of these 3. These players are top 5 at their positions, if not number 1 overall. So that's a no-brainer. But because I don't know about Marvin Harrison Jr. this week, I would be starting Michael Wilson, no doubt about it. This Rams matchup is a neutral one, and their secondary doesn't scare me. So Brissett loves to throw it deep, and Michael Wilson will get a shit ton of volume if Harrison doesn't play. So I put Harrison in the sit category, dealing with a heel injury. He needs a doctor's opinion, and I doubt he plays. It looks like he'll miss 1 game with that heel. He's also coming off the appendicitis, and maybe that'll just help him rather than hurt him. So Harrison, I don't think will play. We'll see if he does, but if he does, I would definitely start him. That's a no-brainer. But assuming he's injured, that's an automatic benching. Michael Wilson will be likely a top 15 play against the Rams. He didn't quite step up last week, but he's played so well without Harrison, I would definitely start him if I still have him. But Kyron, I would definitely start. The Arizona matchup's top 10 on the season, and in the last month, it's actually top 4. It's an elite upgrade against Arizona, but he did get vultured and kind of not play as well as Blake Corum. So Corum could also be an interesting start this week, but he was more efficient than had good volume. I still don't quite trust Corum as a safe play, but if you're desperate, definitely a long shot candidate. More interesting in DFS. The Cardinals matchup is pretty good, but I also think Stafford will bounce back in the passing game. So maybe not going to have that rush attempt on the goal line that saves you. That's why I'd probably bench Blake Corum, but we mentioned it with Marvin Harrison Jr. If he doesn't play, then that upgrades other receivers, and Greg Dortch would have value. But given Harrison probably comes back next week and Dortch would be irrelevant after that, I understand not picking him up off the wire. But I do think this week he'll have a good game. I really think Dortch has legit flex play value in this matchup. But just hoping for a touchdown, it's still a little risky to trust. In general, I'm only trusting the running backs as legit flex plays. But Bam Knight, I don't know if he'll retain the starting job. It's all dependent on Trey Benson, who's been practicing for like 2 weeks now, but still is on IR. So odds are he returns in this divisional matchup, though it's a bottom 5 spot. The Rams defense is literally one of the toughest on the season. However, in the last 4 games, they're starting to allow touchdowns. And last week, Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle played very well. So in the last month, it's actually number 14. It's not as scary. The Rams' run defense is pretty mediocre in the last 4 weeks. So maybe Bam Knight, if he gets the start, the volume will be high enough where you trust him. But without a touchdown, I don't think he'll be a safe play. And then that applies to Benson as well. His first game back, what is his volume going to look like? I don't feel guaranteed to endorse him as a lock in the lineup. But Parkinson gets a great matchup. Last week, I liked him as an interesting flex candidate. I would still roster him as a backup. I could still see a touchdown pretty easily, but Stafford kind of shit the bed. Last week was a big outlier for the Rams, and this matchup's great against Arizona. So not a bad play at all. I think Parkinson does have value, but so touchdown dependent. If you don't get it, you will get burned. So maybe you'd rather go in a direction where you're getting more volume and yards, but Parkinson can still drop 12 points this week if a touchdown comes back to him. The matchup's good enough where you could assume that happens and likely not be wrong. But the Rams defense is great. I think the Cardinals might really struggle, but they have lit it up. And then the Rams really struggled last week. So that's why I only have them as a flex play. But in general, you would like to start them. If they limit the run game, I think they'll be fine. But I could also see Brissett throw for like 350 and 3 touchdowns. There's a chance this game is too high of a shootout where you shouldn't trust them. Maybe they burn you. But Davis Allen behind Colby Parkinson, more involved than Terrence Ferguson, but neither of these tight ends are safe. So definitely bench him. Arizona against Stafford, fuck that shit. Definitely benching them. And then Harrison, I don't think will play. I think he's dealing with a heel injury. I think he's hurt. So not going to assume he's active. And then DeMercado didn't play last week. DeMercado will be out, likely, yet again. So that's it for this matchup. You're trusting all the big studs. And then because Harrison likely doesn't play, I'm definitely starting Michael Wilson. But I do think the Rams defense, Colby Parkinson, the tight end, and even Trey Benson are legit streaming options. Very solid flex plays, more high-end flex options than low-end, desperate ones. But that's it for this game. Let me move on to the Chiefs hosting the Texans. And this game on Sunday night, I think is going to be a very heavy defensive battle. But there are some studs that are just locks in your lineup. However, I don't feel that great about bumping them up in the rankings. Like Nico Collins against the Chiefs secondary, that is not ideal at all. Against Trent McDuffie, I could see Nico Collins kind of shit the bed. It's a bottom 4 matchup on the season, and in the last month, it actually has been getting a little bit easier. It actually does rank top 9 in the last month. So perhaps Nico does play well. I'm not going to bench him. He's Nico Collins, but if not for a rushing touchdown last week, you may have gotten burned. I still would trust Nico, though. He's pretty bust-proof. And same with Rashee Rice, despite the terrible matchup against Houston as well. I can't bench Rashee Rice. It's a big downgrade against Stingley, who wasn't targeted a single time last week. But if you look closer on the last 4 games, the Texans defense actually ranks number 24. So no longer bottom 3, just bottom 10. And maybe other than Rice, that's where players will capitalize. But Rice, I still think, will be the main target for touchdowns from Patrick Mahomes. So big downgrade, not going to rank him top 10, but both Rice and Nico are still in my lineup. And same goes for this Texans quarterback matchup. It's the toughest on the year, but in the last month, it's number 26. It has getting slightly easier in the last 4 games. So a big downgrade for Mahomes, but I still think I'm going to start him. Mahomes has been really elite this year, and odds are with their playoff hopes on the line, they will play well enough where Mahomes still contributes. I think he will run a lot in this game. They are so desperate for a win, and the run game is so bad. That's where Mahomes, I think, will have to scramble because his targets won't be open down the field. He will run a little extra. I could see like 60 rushing yards and a touchdown on the ground from Mahomes this week. So I would still start him, but definitely a lower end option. The Texans matchup is very scary. And for that reason, the Texans, I think, are a defense worth starting. In general, they always pay off. Even against, what was it, the Bills and the Colts last week, they were good plays. The Texans, I do trust from a floor standpoint, and odds are Mahomes throws a pick, if not 2, in this game. I like the Texans a lot as a reliable top 10 play. Rest of season, they're just so talented, I don't want to be benching them if I have them. So similar to the Broncos, kind of a lock in your lineup all of the time, but against Kansas City, not going to be top 5 in the ranks this week, but still worth a start, if you ask me. Stroud, though, gets a solid matchup. The Chiefs are number 16 on the year, so a neutral spot, no downgrade for Stroud. If you look closer, though, it's top 7 in the last 4 games, a very big upgrade for CJ Stroud. So I like his chemistry with Jaden Higgins. Higgins is actually looking pretty good, and if Stroud does score a touchdown to Nico, then we're going to get a lot of upside in this game. It is either very low scoring, and I'm right about the Texans defense, but the Chiefs are also a good start, or it's a very high-scoring game, and Stroud does put up some numbers against Mahomes. So I think he's an interesting flex play. Probably not going to start him in a 1-quarterback league, but going to crack my top 16 this week. I think against Kansas City, it's not a bad matchup anymore. So I like Stroud a decent amount. He's been pretty safe lately. The Houston offense is playing well. And then Jaden Higgins really earned my trust last week. I wanted to trust him, but I didn't know if the chemistry with Davis Mills was a fluke, if Stroud would maintain it. So Higgins did pay off good yardage, and he's been scoring a touchdown every other week. That would indicate this game he will find the end zone. So I like Higgins a lot, a very legit flex play, not just this week, but going forward. The volume's been pretty safe, and I would expect at least like 7, if not 10 targets for Jaden Higgins, somewhere in that range. He's been heavily involved in Houston. So a player I loved in the summer, it's finally paying off, and my best ball shares are excited to see what Higgins offers in these last few games. But Kareem Hunt, not the worst matchup against Houston. It's the easiest for running backs, so definitely the guy you want in Kansas City at running back, definitely more valuable than Pacheco. So hoping for a touchdown could happen, could be a solid flex play, but always risky as well. And then Kelsey gets a terrible matchup for tight ends, but in big games like this in prime time, Kelsey also often scores a touchdown. So I will only rank him as a flex play, but at tight end, he'll be in the higher category. He might still crack my top 12, maybe even top 10, but the matchup's bad, and for that reason, I might just fade him. Maybe I like somebody else off the wire a bit more this week, but long shot would be the Chiefs defense. It could work out where the Texans still suck on offense. I wouldn't be entirely shocked if that happened, but odds are they're a bad start. They haven't been looking good lately, but in terms of matchups on the year, it's tough for running backs, receivers, and tight ends. However, in the last month, all of those stats are getting easier. They're all much more average, if not upgrades. It's top 10 for receivers and just average for running backs and tight ends. So Chiefs looking less stout on defense this year. As a Charger fan, I'm here for it, but I don't like Woody Marks this week. The Chiefs have a great defense still, and I will fade him, so no thanks there. Very hard to trust, and Chubb might vulture a touchdown again, but that's the only path for success. I'm going to fade him. I never endorse Chubb anymore, but Noel, not going to be valuable. He's too buried on the depth chart. And then Schultz plays great in good matchups, but also disappears in bad ones. The Chiefs are a bad matchup on the season. 26th this year, but in the last month, it's number 16. Maybe he's going to be okay, but I think tight end is a bit deep this week. And if I'm going to tell you that Kelsey's less valuable, then I don't think Schultz will be a better start. I would just bench Dalton Schultz this week. He's not good in bad matchups, great in good ones. This week, I'm telling you to fade him. But Xavier Worthy, very unsafe start. Last week sucked for him despite some production, no touchdowns. So that's probably his best game of the year for a while. I'll fade him against Houston. That's for sure. And then Hollywood Brown needs a touchdown, but against the Texans, not going to bet on it. No thanks there. And then Pacheco seems to have lost his job to Kareem Hunt, so fuck that shit. And then I still believe that Brashard Smith isn't going to be atrocious in his career, but at this stage of his season, he's just not getting enough touches at all. But my long shot for the Texans is Christian Kirk. And given the Chiefs defense has some studs at corner, I could see the slot wideout actually contribute. If it's not going to go to Schultz, then I do think the receiver for Houston will have to step up. So Kirk might score a touchdown this week. I could see it happen, but odds are I would fade him. I only trust Higgins if I'm going to start someone other than Nico Collins. So no thanks there. That's it for this game. I'm downgrading everyone, but I'm still starting studs like Nico, Rice, and Mahomes. The Texans defense I'm still going to start. And then some upside this week for Stroud and Jaden Higgins. But Hunt and Kelsey, I think, are the only other players I would consider. And then the last game on the week is on Monday. And sadly, there's some red flags regarding the Chargers offense. When it comes to Justin Herbert, this is going to decide the fate of this game. If Herbert doesn't play, then you don't want to be starting any Chargers wide receiver or pass catcher. That'd be terrible. Without Herbert, I don't trust Trey Lance whatsoever. But I expect Herbert to play. He played through it against Las Vegas, and this is a must-win game, if you ask me. Very critical for their playoff hopes, for them to win. So I think he'll play through it. He had surgery on Monday just to repair a broken finger, and it's on his non-throwing hand. So it can be stabilized enough. Well, he didn't practice Wednesday. They play Monday, and that was just a walkthrough. I think Herbert will be back on the field, but obviously got to monitor his status. Honestly, I think the best handcuff is actually Trey Lance, because unless you just don't want to start Herbert at all, you have to wait till Monday. The only other option would be his backup. There's no other player you can start if Herbert isn't active. So Lance runs the ball. Lance is my long shot. And Lance, I think, actually could have good fantasy numbers. Against the Eagles, though, it's not ideal. So that could absolutely blow up in your face. If you are stuck with Lance, you might lose automatically. Herbert may not actually play in this game, but I assume he will. I assume he will play well, and I still would start him if active. But really, I'm expecting Hampton, the rookie running back, to go off in this game. The Eagles are not a good run defense. Top 6 matchup on the year right now. Hampton is going to go off. So as long as Hampton is active and healthy, volume will be good, he'll be efficient, and I don't think he will be stopped at all. The Chargers O-line is bad, but I like the matchup here, and Hampton is so talented. He also catches a lot of receptions as well. He can contribute in many different ways. Hampton is a must start if he's healthy. So you do need to handcuff him to Vidal. The game is on Monday, so if Hampton is inactive, then Vidal is a must start yet again. However, I do think Hampton will return to the lineup. So make sure he practices in full. If he doesn't by Saturday, then that's going to be a big gamble and it might not work out. But I think he'll be activated in time. As long as he comes off IR and is questionable by Sunday, he will be starting and playing on Monday. So I'm going to start Hampton. I'm also going to start A.J. Brown. Despite this Chargers matchup being the toughest for receivers, I don't give a shit. Last week was tough for him, and A.J. Brown played lights out. Brown is the only part of this offense that's playing well. So got to start him. Can't fade him anymore. I think the funk is over with A.J. Brown, but not the Eagles offense. I think Hurts is a bit unsafe, but his rushing stats always carry you. Odds are I'm still going to start Jalen Hurts, but this matchup is bad. Bottom 5 against the Chargers, not a good spot at all. And I could understand fading him in the rankings, but I'm still going to keep him top 10. I think he'll still be like back-to-back with Herbert, most likely. Odds are he's still top 12 at the very least. But Barkley is not safe at all right now, not playing very well, very little efficiency, very touchdown dependent. And the Chargers matchup is kind of difficult on the year, but there are some matchups where they were just so easy that skews the numbers. If you remove that month-long stretch from like weeks 5 through 8, then LA is actually a very difficult matchup for running backs. So could burn you, could blow up in your face, but Barkley always a lock in the lineup. Got to roll with the punches. And then Ladd, I think also a lock in the lineup. Based on this passing game, it's very random. Could go elsewhere, but he's the guy I trust most. So I think you have to start him. As long as Herbert is active, I would still start Ladd McConkey. But Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen, and Oronde Gadsden are all in the mix, and all could definitely contribute well enough where Ladd is not a safe play. QJ, I think, is a little higher upside than Keenan, but Keenan is probably safer for a floor. And then Gadsden at tight end, usually a good safe start, but this week a bad matchup, bottom 4 against Philadelphia. And I think I'm more likely going to fade Oronde Gadsden. Not my ideal start. Last week was another bad matchup, and he only had 1 reception. It was down the field for like 30 yards, but still that wasn't good enough in fantasy to help you. So this week I'm going to be fading Gadsden again, definitely just a flex play. But this matchup against the Chargers is also really tough for Dallas Goedert. On the year, it's bottom 10, but actually I'm mistaken. In the last month, it does rank top 10. The Chargers are getting easier in this department, but they did just have a game against Brock Bowers with 2 touchdowns. That definitely skews it, and maybe it's misleading. So Goddard has been hard to trust because Hurts is hard to trust. And at this point in the year, Goddard is no longer a lock in the top 10. I've been ranking him too high. I'm going to stop doing that. He's not going to be in the top 10 this week. But Devontae Smith, also hard to trust. The matchup's terrible, and Hurts is not playing very well at the moment. So if it's not A.J. Brown, I don't think it's a guaranteed lock in lineup. Devontae just a flex play this week in a very difficult matchup. But the Chargers, I think, are an interesting defensive start, but their schedule's so bad down the stretch, I don't think they're worth rostering. And against Philly, it does still sound kind of scary to go up against. So this game could be a shootout, but I think the Chargers will win. And given the funk that the Eagles are in, I do think they're somewhat valuable at defense this week. But my long shot is Philly. The Eagles defense is awesome. And especially if Herbert doesn't play, they will be a lights out must start defense against Trey Lance. So Eagles, I think, will be bad if Herbert plays. However, if it's Lance, they'll be great. And Lance could also be awesome in fantasy. Lance could give you 100 rushing yards and a touchdown. Lance will be scrambling for his life. He's very dynamic in that regard, but also might have like 4 turnovers. Not a player I trust, but in the Jim Harbaugh system, might actually look good. For fantasy, I don't think it's insane to handcuff him to Herbert if that's your only option, but you could probably get a better option off the wire. If you're worried about Herbert, maybe just start someone like Trevor Lawrence instead. But I do think Vidal is still a must hold until we know that Hampton is off of IR. I don't think you want to be dropping Kimani Vidal. Had a great game last week, could happen again if Hampton is inactive. But Trey Harris starting to get some looks, but not ready to trust him. Not quite the long shot candidate. I would just bench him, leave him on the wire. In this offense, it's too crowded, but Bigsby and Shipley getting a little bit of volume, but not enough to trust. Definitely bench both of them. But I think if I was handcuffing one, it would be Bigsby to Saquon. And then Jahan Dotson, a terrible matchup. Definitely not going to trust him at all. Absolutely. Leave him on the wire. So that's it for this game. I'm trusting Hampton a lot, assuming he plays A.J. Brown a lock in the lineup. And then Hurts and Herbert, I think are still top 10 quarterbacks, despite their lackluster performances lately. I think this game is likely high scoring. But Barkley and Ladd, I think you still have to start. And then everyone else is a flex play. I could see both defenses be very valuable, but odds are it's more high scoring game. So too much garbage time and points that burn you. So QJ, Keenan, and Gadsden, I think are more interesting than Goddard and Devontae. I trust Herbert in the passing game more than Jalen Hurts. The matchups are also tough for the Eagles pass catchers. So that is it for all of my start sits. But last thing to mention, there's also 4 teams on bye, and these are the matchups that we're missing out on this week. Really, it's just the Giants matchup that I wish we had. They're such a good spot for quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, even tight ends, I think are going to be fine against the Giants. Great matchup there. But then the Patriots are pretty tough for running backs, neutral everywhere else. And then the Panthers are tough for quarterbacks and receivers, but good for running backs and tight ends. And then the Niners are typically a good matchup across the board, except at running back. So a few good matchups are missing, but overall, it's not that big of a deal. This week should be fun, but that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content. Again, I apologize for posting this kind of late. I wanted to make sure we get all of it out of the way. So instead of the 2-parter, it's all one video. If you enjoyed, if you made it this far, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I'll see you next time. I'll see you tomorrow. I'm Adam Riancho, and thanks for watching. Nice and blunt.